All right, so for my virtual teaching assignment, I'm going to be teaching you about Chapter 8, about instructional strategies. I'll be talking about just general planning of instruction, as well as talking about student-directed or learner-directed and teacher-directed. So the first topic they'll be covering is planning instruction. So kind of just like what goes into a lesson. Why do we do the things we do to make a lesson? So I'll be talking about goals and objectives, backwards design, Common Core and standards, the different taxonomies, Bloom's, and understanding by design, task analysis, and engaging students. So first one's going to be goals and objectives. And these are just kind of things that you really need to think about to lay out planning your lessons. Instructional goals refers to more general long-term outcomes of learning. So that's stuff that you want kids to take away for like the rest of their lives, type of situation, the things that you really want to stick with them. And objectives are a little bit more short-term. They're more referring to the little bits, like the daily things or maybe a weekly lessons where you want them to really get these specific things out of that day or that week. In general, thinking about your instructional goals and objectives, those should heavily influence what you choose to teach, how you decide to teach it. So, for example, the teacher-led or the learner-led assessment and instruction. And then what assessment you choose to utilize to understand how much your students learn. So the first way to think about how you want your outcomes to be prevalent in your lesson is to use backwards design. Backwards design, the first step is you determine the end goal. So you're going to determine those goals and objectives and think about what you really want the students to learn. And then after you've determined that, you decide what methods you're going to use to get there. So that would be like your instructional strategies and things like that. And then finally, you plan individual learning experiences and activities that build towards the things that you specified in the past. Common Core and standards, those are guides that are supposed to help you teachers in certain subject areas. They don't cover all areas, but in general, they're supposed to guide you to make sure that students are learning everything that they need to learn in your subject area. Common Core is more specifically to like the subjects that are considered academic. But the arts and stuff and other subjects do have their own standards they have to guide them. In general, though, standards establish that all content areas must strive to increase the literacy skills of their students. And this could be in a variety of ways, and it should be in a variety of ways because there are many types of literacy. But in general, Common Core is not like something that dictates what you have to do. It's more of a guide than laws. All right, so Bloom's taxonomy is one sort of guide that you can use when creating a lesson. These are just the kind of steps in like what students can do at different stages. So you start off at the bottom. The broadest sense is just like remembering information that you've given the student, if they can recall it from their brain. Then understanding it is if they can explain and talk about the subjects that you have introduced to them. Applying it is taking that information and using it in new ways. So kind of going, all right, here's A and B. What can you do with that to make C, D, and E? Analyzing is being able to distinguish between little minute details, comparing and contrasting, criticism. Evaluating is if they can debate about it. Like, could a student have a debate if they were given that subject and defend and support the different viewpoints? And then creating. So creating is the end goal that I have as a teacher who's going to be teaching art. Creating is a very important step for me to work towards. So I have to kind of help the students quickly go through all the other phases so that they can use the knowledge that I'm giving them to create art. Understanding by design is another different way to look at how students are understanding when you're planning your lessons. So there's just kind of 6 ways of understanding that this taxonomy kind of talks about. So there is perspective, which is the ability to analyze and draw conclusions about contrasting viewpoints. So kind of just understanding what other people are thinking about a subject and how their point of views could differ from your own. There's interpretation, which is creating something new from the learned knowledge, including the ability to critique and criticize. So that is a very important step for students to be able to understand. Explanation is to, demonstrate, describe, things like that. You have to have an in-depth understanding enough to be able to talk about it in an in-depth way. Application is, taking that information and applying it to something new. Empathy is being able to walk in another person's shoes. It's, generally the definition of empathy. But, in reaction to someone else that's around them when they're learning. And self-knowledge is the ability to self-examine and reflect, which is very important if students are to understand how much they have learned themselves so that they can grow as a student. But both of these different breakdowns of like students' understanding are very helpful, I thought, when thinking about planning a lesson and what content you need to teach and how. Task analysis is another way to help to break down more complex tasks. So in task analysis, you identify essential behavioral and cognitive aspects of mastering a topic or skill, and then you take that general big idea and you break it down into little teeny pieces that are easy to digest so that students can take in those little pieces and eventually build up to that big task that you want them to do. And there's a couple different components to consider. There's behavioral, subject matter, and information processing analysis, and those will all help to contribute towards breaking down those big tasks into smaller components. And keeping students engaged is probably the most important part about this whole section, because when students aren't engaged, they are not going to learn. Like if they're not interested in learning, they're not going to take information in. So you have to keep them physically and emotionally engaged, which can be which needs to keep them thinking about the visual, verbal, behavioral aspects of a lesson. So great ways to do that are like call and response, activities where they have to think and apply things that you just talked about. Just like thinking critically and creatively about information that you're presenting them. For example, later on, I'll be talking about learner-directed instruction, and discussions are a great way to keep students engaged. So you can give them a topic that they can just kind of talk about and really explore the different viewpoints. All right, so we're going to move on to learner-directed instruction, just like I talked about. And the first thing we'll be talking about is what I just brought up, so discussions. Those can be done in small and whole groups. There's cooperative learning that I'll be discussing, conducting and presenting research, peer tutoring, technology facilitating collaboration, so CSCL, authentic tasks, and scaffolding. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to talk about is discussion-based learning. And in discussions, the students will lead talking about whatever subject that the teacher can present to guide what they're talking about, because, we don't want students talking about what they ate for lunch. We want them talking about the subject matter of the class. But in discussions, they're more likely to just voice their opinions if there's not like just one right answer. If there's many different viewpoints that could lead to the right to a answer they perceive as correct. But while discussing, they're more likely to develop a meaningful relationship with thoughts and materials. As someone in the arts, I've had a lot of classes that have been very discussion based, and those have been the ones that I've enjoyed the most, being learner directed discussions. You just get a lot more opportunity to explore the different subjects being presented to you, and I feel like gain a deeper understanding that you would not have gotten from, for example, lecture-based instruction method. It can be used in pretty much any academic discipline, which is awesome. I feel like there's not a whole lot of like different instructional methods that could be used in absolutely any discipline. The only problem with it is that students have to be actively engaged to get the most out of their lessons. So if they're not actively engaged in the discussion, then they're not going to get nearly as much out of it. And it's basically like they're just kind of passively absorbing information instead of actively interacting with it. So cooperative learning, it could be a couple different things, but generally it's situations where students' success is reliant on their ability to work with other people. So, like group projects, the book provided an example of there was a prize that students were working for, and the winners were the group of 3 that scored the average highest. So they were encouraged to help each other to score higher as a group. So students are more willing to talk about and explain subject matter, help students who are struggling, and just generally promotes high achievement for students of all levels. The only problem with it is that when you're doing this, honestly, this could be a problem with discussions as well, is that students could be more interested in social interaction than academic progress, and they could just kind of start talking about their day and their friends and the things that they're planning to do on the weekend. And so they will need a little bit of guides to make sure that they're keeping on task with their subject that they're supposed to be talking about. Conducting and presenting research. So this helps students to personalize the information being taken in, and through personalization, they form a better connection because it's something that they're interested in. It makes them discover and inquire, which promotes, discovery and inquiry learning, which helps to bolster their knowledge of the subject that you're trying to help them to learn. It helps to enhance the sense of autonomy, so they have to do things on their own, like they're not handheld the entire way. Oops. Oh. There we go. And the biggest problem with it is that they are on the internet most likely. And when you're on the internet, there's websites that are just not presenting factual information or could be harmful. So you have to present sufficient guides to help them stay away from websites that will misdirect them. Peer tutoring is a great way to help students to either solidify their fundamentals by explaining them to other students, or to, get a different person explaining something. So maybe they'll understand it when a peer is explaining it, if a student is struggling to understand something. But generally, it just increases the fundamental knowledge of students in general. It can be done peer-to-peer within a class, with maybe the higher performing and the lower performing students working together. Or it can be done with, between classes. So, like a younger class is working with an older class, and the older group of students has to explain something to the younger group of students, and it helps kind of both of them to solidify their knowledge on that subject. When you're talking about just like the students gaining knowledge, they are more intrinsically motivated to internally motivated. They want to learn the material if they know that they're going to have to teach it to somebody else, because now it's not just about them gaining that knowledge, it's about the other person gaining that knowledge. And technology has really, really exploded over the last little while. So, computer supported collaborative learning is what it's called, and you can have students work together through like for example, Google presentations, where you can have a group of students create a single presentation without having to sit in the same place. Like they can all work from home on their own part of the presentation and see what everybody else is doing, and they can kind of collaborate that way, which wasn't possible 20 years ago. And a collaboratively written paper is another example that I came up with that I actually did in another class, where we had a Google Doc and we all went to see an art show, and we each just kind of like added our own little thoughts to the paper, but we had to do it in a way that it sounded like it was written by one person. So we had like one dedicated editor, and then everyone else would go in and like kind of help to make sure that their pieces fit in with everybody else's. And it was a really interesting way to write a paper and break up the work and really collaborate with your peers. Authentic tasks are a great way for students to learn. There's a lot of different things you can do with authentic tasks, but mainly they simulate the real world applications of materials. So, when students ask, well, when am I going to use this in real life? This is what you can do to help them see how they can use information in real life. You can utilize technology like I just talked about in the last slide. Any sort of thing like that can be utilized to create an authentic task. And the great thing about this is you could set it as an activity to do in school, or it could be something that is like a homework assignment where students have to do it outside of class and interact with the community and really understand how what they're learning in schools is affecting the world around them. And then scaffolding is just a great thing to keep in mind when doing learner-directed instruction, because it's going to help guide whatever the students are doing to work towards those learning objectives and learning goals that you have set for them. It's basically just to ensure that they will get as much as they possibly can out of each lesson, even though they are leading the activities. All right, and then my third subject area is teacher-directed instruction. So in teacher-directed instruction, I'll talk about different types of instruction that you can do, different instructional strategies, utilizing effective cognitive processes, direct instruction, computer-based instruction, the effectiveness of questions and kind of call and response, and homework. Kind of what should homework really be, because not sure that all teachers really understand that. So, types of instruction, one of them is just expository, and that's basically just teachers presenting information to students. Another could be a textbook assignment where the students take the information from the textbook and take it in. A similar thing is video. Those are just kind of like different types of expository, because an expository could be a verbal lecture, it could be assigning videos and things, but it's basically where the student is not giving input back. It's just when the student is taking in information only. And teacher-directed instruction should involve interaction and input from students to keep them engaged. So, while a lot of teacher-directed instruction is going to be expository, you need to make sure that the students have a chance to interact with the information that you're presenting to them. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that, but just keep in mind that they need to have some way to connect and interact. Different instructional strategies are to basically think about what students already know and what misconceptions that could bring about with the lesson. So, we need to make sure we know what they know and help them to correct misconceptions and to connect that old knowledge, the prior knowledge, with the new knowledge that we're presenting to them. So when you're utilizing effective cognitive processes, there's a couple different things that you can think about to promote that. So an advanced organizer would be just kind of like organizing the information sometimes in a visual way. Connections to prior knowledge is what I just talked about, is where you take something old and you help them build on that with the new knowledge. So kind of taking that previous foundation and, building a house with it. Organized presentation, so this could be slides and things like that. Signals, which could just be, that could be done through questioning. Just trying to like trigger knowledge in the brain to come up. Visual aids are great for those visual learners. Present something, it could be a graphic, it could be an object, it could be a video, something like that. Pacing, how fast are you teaching this lesson? Are you going too fast? Are the kids able to take notes, to respond, to be able to take that information in? And then summaries are a great way to help kids to self-regulate. So, you summarize at the end of a section, and if someone's like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know we talked about that, when they see that summary, like, they know that they missed something. Direct instruction is something that I briefly mentioned before, but it's basically where the teacher is giving information to the students. It's not through like anybody else giving information. It is the teacher interacting with the students, giving that information. And there's a couple components that are usually involved with this, which would be you start off with review of the previous material, trying to connect to that prior knowledge. Then you move on to the current lesson's objectives, so the students know what they're supposed to be learning from this lesson. Then you introduce, new material presented in small logical steps, so that the students can take in that information little bits at a time and build it up. After that, you're going to do guided practice, most likely. Guided practice is a good way to help students check with themselves, as well as you check in with students to make sure they gain that knowledge that you wanted them to gain. Then there's independent practice, where they'll practice independently, and that you can really, really see then if they like picked up that information or if they're still struggling. And then the way you find out if they're still struggling is that follow up and review. Figure out what the students still need to learn, review the information that they need to learn again, things like that. Then computer-based instruction is, newer. I think it really started coming up probably when I was in elementary school. I did see a little bit of it, but I really didn't use a whole lot of computer technology in class until middle school. So it's fairly new. I'm pretty young, I feel like, and it wasn't even around for my whole education cycle in K-12. So basically, computer-based instruction, you can really utilize it for remote learning, like we've been doing for the last couple years here. It's kind of boomed there. But you can provide, supplementary material for a lesson, pre-recorded lectures, videos, websites, anything like that. And it's just becoming more and more prevalent and available to help to supplement what you're teaching in class. All right, so the effectiveness of questions. So that's kind of like call and response, or, just asking questions about something that you've just taught, just to like verify that students have been taking in the information that you're trying to present to them. And it really helps students to self-regulate, so that they know what they're taking in is, what they're supposed to be taking in. There's two kinds of questioning that you can do with lower level, which helps students to recall like previous information, base knowledge, things like that. It's not doing anything new with that knowledge, it's recalling. And then higher level questions are questions that require students to take that material and apply it or do something new with that material. So they're asking for that extra step. And finally, homework. So homework can be something to use to increase the length of the school day. It shouldn't be busy work, though. It needs to be something meaningful that will add to the knowledge of the student. It could be something like extra practice, new simple concepts based on something that you've already kind of laid the groundwork for in the lesson, making the students expand on their knowledge. Or it could be real world experiences, like I was talking about earlier with the authentic activities. And that is it. So thank you for watching my presentation.